Officer Schroeder parked his cruiser in an Elgin, Illinois lot on Sunday morning, October 2nd, 1966. He was mid-shift and completely stuck there. A massive crowd of locals stood completely quiet, gazing up at the 144-foot timepiece structure that had guarded their community for 60 years. Right at 9:30, the explosives detonated. The structure crumbled, scattering a flock of birds overhead. Within 10 seconds, 100 years of legacy was reduced to rubble. One local historian, just 17 at the time, put it perfectly. That manufacturing plant touched nearly every single person in the area. Even if you weren't employed there yourself, a sibling likely was. It impacted the whole community. But here is the untold truth: Elgin did not collapse due to poor craftsmanship. Across 100 years, that facility produced 60 million pocket and wristwatches. That accounted for 50% of all premium clocks manufactured across America. 50%. They were so utterly fixated on precision that they constructed a private stargazing facility strictly to align their mechanical movements with celestial bodies. Not a single competing manufacturer in the nation's past ever pulled that off. And now it is just a basic shopping plaza. A pair of cement pillars is the only surviving trace. How did they ultimately fail? We are going to uncover that very mystery right now. Chapter 1. Zero Clocksmiths. We need to rewind the clock to 1864. The nation is actively tearing itself apart in civil combat, leaving roughly 500,000 citizens lifeless. Meanwhile, up in the Windy City, a handful of ambitious entrepreneurs have their minds focused on an entirely different concept: portable timekeeping. Back in 1864, securing a high-end pocket watch stateside meant sourcing it from exactly one state, Massachusetts, specifically Wallam, about 30 miles outside Boston, nowhere else. The whole national clock manufacturing sector was confined to a tiny pocket of New England, a solid 1,500 miles away from the Midwest. Midwesterners weren't crafting these items and lacked the expertise anyway. You could not simply purchase the necessary gear and launch a new business. Each individual production plant engineered their specialized tools from the ground up. Turning mechanisms and highly accurate gadgets were entirely bespoke and fiercely guarded. There were no supply books or wholesale retailers. Breaking into the market required poaching an experienced insider. Consequently, those Windy City investors set out to find precisely that. Fast forward to spring 1864. A pair of gentlemen associated with the Wallam firm, namely Ira G. Blake and P.S. Bartlett, traveled out to the Midwest hub. They crossed paths with J.C. Adams, a skilled horologist managing a local boutique, while also handling the master clocks for the regional train lines. The three of them grabbed a seat together and began mapping things out. Their grand scheme was launching an Illinois-based manufacturing hub, essentially dragging the trade away from the East Coast and dropping it right in the heartland. A prominent publication back then called this vibe pure, fearless frontier grit. That was just a nice way of stating these guys possessed the sheer audacity to attempt a feat previously unheard of beyond the Allegheny Range. Adams wrangled the financial backers. Looking at the actual roster of folks who funded this thing, it is honestly quite comical. None of them possessed any timekeeping expertise. We had Benjamin W. Raymond, an ex-city leader turned venture capitalist, plus Howard Z. Culver, who managed a massive local publishing house. Then there was Foe Carpenter, the earliest registered druggist in town, and an outspoken anti-slavery advocate alongside Thomas S. Dickerson, a medical professional sitting on the transit authority, and Edward H. Williams, who served the courts as both an attorney and a magistrate. Rounding it out was George M. Wheeler, a pure financial backer. So you have a politician, a publisher, an apothecary, a physician, a legal mind, and a money man. Zero horologists among them. But that was the entire underlying strategy. These dudes were corporate tycoons, not artisan tinkerers. Their shared vision dictated that tomorrow's success lay beyond manual artistry. They banked heavily on intelligent workflows, uniform components, automated steps, and mechanical rigs outpacing human labor. They envisioned a sprawling industrial complex, not a quaint studio. Fast forward to August 27, 1864. The National Watch Company, officially formed in the Windy City, with $100,000 in seed money, which translates to about $1.9 million currently. The founders settled on Elgin, Illinois, a riverside town situated 30 miles outside the city. Their terms were simple: comp us 35 acres of real estate. Town officials eagerly accepted, except the chosen plot was an abandoned pasture, and its proprietor refused to subdivide. The ultimatum was to purchase the entire 71 acres for $3,550, or the deal is off. Municipal funds fell short. Stepping up to the plate, four area merchants combined their personal cash, acquired the massive parcel, and gifted the necessary footprint. Handed it over completely free of charge. The locals were that desperate for the industrial boom. By 1865, funding swelled to 500,000 and construction officially commenced. The era of automation had finally reached the prairie state. Yet one gigantic hurdle remained standing in their way. Chapter 2. The Magnificent Seven. These guys secured the property, the funding, and the drive, yet lacked any clue regarding actual clock construction. Such was the harsh truth of 1864. You simply couldn't browse the classifieds and recruit a seasoned horology expert. Every ounce of expertise fueling the nation's timekeeping trade resided under a single roof, the Elgin Watch Company out east. The proprietary equipment, the crafting methods, the operational workflows. The employees over in Massachusetts held all those secrets solely in their minds. To even stand a chance in the market, you had to poach their top-tier talent directly. Therefore, Benjamin Raymond and J.C. Adams executed precisely that strategy. During September 1864, the pair traveled all the way to Massachusetts, strolled right into America's premier timekeeping plant, and scouted their marks. They weren't looking for average floor hands, they wanted the elite engineering squad, fabricators who possessed deep fundamental knowledge of the equipment, guys capable of strolling into a vacant Midwestern warehouse and constructing an entire manufacturing line out of thin air. Back in 1864, this maneuver was perfectly lawful. Corporate espionage statutes and restrictive covenants didn't exist yet. Coaxing a worker to jump ship was just standard capitalism. The duo returned home alongside 7 key experts. Looking back, people dubbed them the 7 Stars: George Hunter, John K. Bigelow, Patton S. Bartlett, Otis Hoy, Charles E. Mason, Daniel R. Hartwell, and Charles S. Mosley bagged an unbelievable deal. $5,000 up front, $5,000 annually for 5 years, plus an entire acre on site. Adjusted for inflation, that deal tops $1 million. For an operator in 1864, it was absolute wealth. Yet folks completely gloss over this crucial detail. The biggest takeaway regarding this crew is that each guy was an equipment builder primarily, and a clockmaker secondly. That difference is huge. Forget the overseas method of artisans carefully putting together individual clocks manually. This crew emerged straight from the gritty United States factory scene. They tackled the issue differently. Instead of wondering how to construct a clock, they figured out how to design an automated assembly process. This mentality totally divided Elgin from the overseas blueprint long before they even finished their initial prototype. Charles S. Mosley became the industry's top plant manager, an empty role since 1852. He fully grasped both the artistry and the underlying framework needed to scale it up. He was the missing link, connecting the crew's expertise to their massive upcoming plant. The crew relocated to Elgin, claimed their property, and started sketching. They dedicated all of 1865 entirely to constructing manufacturing equipment. 0 timepieces launched that year. They spent daily shifts building highly specialized gear including turners, slicers, and testing meters. They custom-built everything since store-bought options lacked the necessary precision. Buying this hardware simply was impossible. You either engineered the gear yourself or you went without. Construction wrapped up by 1866, running off vapor energy along the Fox River. Elgin lacked a local utility, so they threw together a private fuel plant out back. Come 1869, the Illinois Watch Company lured a few group members away with identical tactics, keeping the poaching loop alive. Fast forward 150 years. Silicon Valley labels this practice headhunting and pretends they pioneered it. Completely false. Illinois beat them there. Part 3. Inside the contraption. April 1st, 1867, the plant goes dead silent. Following 36 months of property negotiations, headhunting, and equipment assembly, Elgin successfully cranked out their initial timepiece. Yet an underlying concept sparked the plant's creation long before that moment. The group showed up asking something overseas artisans completely ignored. How do you design an automated timepiece assembly line? They solved this through absolute part swapping. Every single cog tension coil and crystal mounting was engineered so flawlessly that elements snapped right into matching models without manual tweaks. No shaving things down or guessing the fit. Components clicked perfectly together effortlessly every single time. Over in places like Switzerland and England, expert craftsmen were stuck making single clocks manually, piecing things together independently. Stunning craftsmanship, but totally unscalable. Elgin's method easily cranked out 1 million units annually. This was their master plan. To handle mass production flawlessly, Elgin invented a ranking method. They labeled every mechanism using tier digits based on dimensions, crystals, and polish. Swap one detail fresh tier. Strict systematic control before modern standards existed. By 1875, the crew began fabricating tension coils internally. That eliminated another external dependency. They took complete ownership over production. Dominate each piece. Control the craftsmanship stretching from unrefined metal down to the polished face. Eventually came the premier B.W. Raymond model honoring President Benjamin W. Raymond. Size 18, key crank solid back, 15 crystals. Climate calibrated sequence 101. Cost $117. Back then, meat ran 3 pennies per pound, and plant employees brought home roughly $1 daily. Buying this timepiece required several months of paychecks from its actual creators. Sequence 101 eventually hit auction. Elgin bought it back for $15,000. Currently sitting inside the Hemans Cultural Center, that initial artifact displayed inside a glass case demanded 6 solid months of hard labor to finish. The brand spent years slashing those production hours, eventually pumping out millions of units. An absolute legacy. They christened each design honoring their directors. H.Z. Culver launched July 16, 1867. G.M. Wheeler followed that November. Then H.H. Taylor, J.T. Ryerson, and Matthew Laughlin. Every mechanism got a moniker representing an actual person. Regarding the building, one major architectural headache existed. What is the trick to putting together microscopic pieces without light bulbs during the 1860s? The simple solution? Massive glass pane. The plant section stood high and skinny. Massive glass panes spanned each level to bathe the inside with sunshine and completely eliminate dark corners. Let the crew see. Pure engineering, absolutely zero art. Unprocessed supplies arrived via tracks rolling directly onto the grounds. Rail cars delivered unrefined metal copper, gold hides, rubber grease, and glass. Completed timepieces shipped out via identical routes. This was no ordinary structure. It acted as a massive contraption devouring natural resources up front and spitting out highly accurate tools out back. By 1905, a 144-foot pillar hit National Street. Its 3-foot digits were easily legible from half a mile out. It housed a Seth Thomas mechanism internally. This rig became the globe's premier auto-cranking pillar timepiece to ever run successfully. The towns synced their schedules to it. By 1925, facility number 1 spanned 583,343 square feet, housing 13.4 acres under a single ceiling. A single structure among several. Come 1888, the employee roster hit 2,300 workers. Almost half guys, half gals. Practically unheard of across 1880s stateside manufacturing. Gals pulled in roughly $6 weekly, while guys banked 3 daily. Strictly a pay disparity rather than talent. Elgin aggressively staffed up with female workers to cut costs. Crafting timepieces required intense focus and rock-solid hands. Naturally, those cheaper salaries massively padded the bottom line. That workspace looked totally alien compared to other stateside plants back then. Chapter 4. Carnage on the Rails. April 19, 1891. Kipton, Ohio. Just a tiny depot past Oberlin. A postal locomotive was hauling eastbound down the lake shore, and Michigan's Southern Line ripping around a curve at roughly 45 miles per hour. Meanwhile, a commuter locomotive was parked dead ahead in a totally restricted spot. The conductor had strict written orders to hold at Kipton until the postal locomotive passed. According to his personal timepiece, he started rolling perfectly on schedule. He was totally oblivious that his timepiece had died for exactly 4 minutes before magically ticking away again. To him, everything seemed completely normal. Ticking normally just 4 minutes behind. 4 little minutes. That triggered a massive front-facing smash-up. Both drivers perished. 6 postal workers riding inside also perished. Both engines were totally obliterated, leaving twisted metal blasted everywhere across the rails. This definitely was not the first time a faulty timepiece caused a massive stateside train wreck. Crappy clocks had been triggering absolute carnage for ages across those one-way routes since dodging oncoming traffic totally relied on split-second synchronization. The Kipton disaster was the absolute final straw that forced everyone to wake up. The Lakeshore route boss tapped a Cleveland jeweler named Webster C. Ball to dig into the whole mess. Ball dug into their tracking methods and uncovered an absolute dumpster fire. Zero regulations, zero oversight. Drivers just snagged whatever cheap dial they could afford. Some worked, most were garbage, zero oversight. Ball designed a completely fresh protocol from the ground up. By 1893, he rolled out ironclad rules for locomotive timepieces. Almost every massive stateside transit company quickly adopted his strict guidelines. If your gear failed the test, you were barred from driving. The stipulations were incredibly hardcore. Exposed dials only. Size 16 or 18. 17 gems minimum. Artificial ruby and sapphire components were required to slash drag at the turning joints. Precision within a 30-second window weekly. Let that sink in, just 30 seconds off across 7 entire days. Running on pure coils and cogs. Zero digital tech. Just steel and physics nailing a 0.003% failure margin. Surviving climates between 34 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Twin-cylinder escapements. Solid steel escape gears. A safety catch required a hard yank to tweak the hands, preventing accidental bumps. Bright-faced dark digits easily visible in the shadows. Every driver bought their own out of pocket. Zero corporate handouts. The massive expense drained 3 months of their paychecks. This birthed a legally enforced endless buyer base for high-end gear. Elgin aggressively chased that cash grab. Their BW Raymond model crushed those strict benchmarks instantly. Father Time dropped shortly after. Both models turned into absolute must-haves for the guys carrying them, trusting that gear to keep commuters breathing across endless stretches of steel rails. The huge ripple effect totally transcended just moving product. Those transit guidelines basically bullied every stateside manufacturer into chasing absolute perfection, nailing that 30-second weekly window flawlessly regardless of brutal weather or aging. Sticking to that insane grind established a mechanical baseline that heavily paid off down the road. Enter Nicholas Manus, the top boss over at the Horological Society of New York. Exploding transit routes during the late 19th century basically single-handedly skyrocketed stateside horology onto the global stage. Those transit lines did more than just buy gear. They cranked up the heat, forcing massive industry evolution. By 1901, Elgin built 600,000 mechanisms out of the 1,875,759 total stateside pieces that season, capturing 32% of the national pie straight out of a single Illinois warehouse. By 1910, Elgin dropped their debut wrist-strap model, totally smoking their stateside rivals. While the pack treated arm gear like a total gimmick, Elgin saw the vision and jumped in headfirst. Years later, they dropped the grade 730 ABW. The WW Raymond became the pioneer arm piece officially cleared for stateside transit duty. That iconic branding kicked off their empire and eventually shut down the transit golden age. Funny how life wraps up like that. Chapter 5. Synced up with the galaxy. Hitting 1908, Elgin completely crowned themselves the biggest stateside timepiece factory. Still dominating the food chain, barely scratched the surface of their upcoming master plan. Back then, President Theodore Roosevelt ordered the Federal Standards Department to aggressively push for razor-sharp national synchronization. The takeaway for the corporate world was brutally obvious. Precision became a massive federal agenda. Buyers were totally primed to reward whoever nailed it perfectly. How Elgin reacted completely shattered anything the clockmaking game had ever tried before. By 1910, the firm finished their own private stargazing facility at 312 Watch Street in Elgin, sitting on a ridge 2 blocks east of their main plant. George Hunter, the in-house designer, crafted this 2-level building using a classic revival motif featuring an 8-sided tower capped with a dome, metal blinds that pulled back for the scope, plus thick cement walls sitting on crushed rock to absorb any shaking from nearby roads and train tracks. Throughout our nation's past, absolutely zero competing timepiece makers constructed a stargazing facility. Zero instances before zero since. The achievement belonged entirely to Elgin. They hired Dr. William W. Payne as their inaugural head, an expert stargazer recruited from Minnesota's Goodell facility, the guy who launched Popular Astronomy magazine. No mere symbol, but a real researcher managing a fully operational site day in and day out. This was their exact operational setup. Inside that dome, a specialized scope rested on a freestanding cement pillar, completely disconnected from the outer walls to stop any building tremors from shaking the gear. A researcher peered into a lens that featured 11 slender upright threads right across the visual center. Whenever a celestial body glided overhead because of the spinning of our planet, that expert monitored its path toward every thread hitting a switch the precise second it passed. That electrical signal then zipped straight down into the subterranean timing chamber. Down there sat German-crafted reefer pendulum devices engineered to meet the absolute strictest standards imaginable. America's own National Institute of Standards and Technology had bought one of these reefers back in 1904 to serve as the country's main reference, precise to 1/100th of a second daily. Keeping that precision required intense atmospheric regulation. The chamber consisted of airtight cement with the heat locked precisely at 81 degrees Fahrenheit, controlled via 58 bulbs installed along the floor, individually wired to thermostats turning on and off to maintain a 0.2 window. Heat fluctuations stretch or shrink pendulums, altering their swing rate. Every timepiece rested upon a pillar driven 60 feet deep into the earth, buffering them against locomotive tremors and electrical storms. They were locked inside glass cases with vacuum controls, since barometric shifts also mess with pendulum movement. Timing beats traveled via wires straight from the stargazing site to the main production area, pulsing once a second. Employees listened to those beats while tuning the gears. Any timepiece shipping out of Elgin was perfectly matched to astronomical readings taken down the street that very same afternoon. Their famous catchphrase wasn't just marketing hype, it was literal fact. Elgin grabs the hours from the heavens and tucks them right into your coat. Then the conflict hit the First World War, lasting from 1914 until 1918. Syncing up combat maneuvers between different squads meant every commander had to lock into the exact same schedule. Arm-mounted dials, which were small, required no hands, and worked perfectly in the mud, became absolutely essential. Surviving troops returned stateside still sporting them. The age of vest pocket dials was silently dying out. Elgin had been churning out arm-mounted versions since 1910. They were perfectly primed for this transition. Over 350 American troops also learned expert mechanical maintenance at the plant while the fighting raged on. This federal deal forged a strategic armed forces partnership that the business would lean on heavily during the subsequent global conflict. The 1920s represented their ultimate golden age. Veterans came back carrying combat pay and arm dials, causing sales to completely explode. When the era closed, the plant had cranked out beyond 9 million pieces, pulling in $22 million, boasting a staff exceeding 4,000, a campus spanning 21 acres, making 2 million dials annually, beating every single timepiece manufacturer globally. Even an American commander-in-chief visited the grounds. Robert Johnson name-dropped Elgin during his 1936 track called Walkin' Blues, while a legendary basketball pro, Elgin Baylor, got his moniker from his dad to honor the brand's stellar domestic quality. Come 1930, this site had manufactured a staggering 32 million items overall. 32 million, a single location right in Illinois. That represented their absolute peak. Nobody realized it, though. Section 6. Initial warning signs. October 1929. Wall Street completely tanked. The Great Depression swept through the nation with an intensity that absolutely zero businesses could escape. Everyday citizens who were previously dropping cash left and right on retail items. Stereo's automobiles, household gadgets, and arm dials just halted. Timepieces became the very first indulgences cut from the budget. Folks could easily survive without fresh wristwear. People definitely couldn't survive without groceries. Elgin took a massive hit. Purchasing completely evaporated. Employee numbers nosedived. Profits plummeted brutally compared to those roaring 1920s peaks. A tiny bounce back happened during 1936 and 1937 as markets settled slightly and European military budgets created fresh sales. Yet the sector simply never bounced back completely. Beneath that immediate economic stress, a massive foundational change was brewing, something the brass at Elgin totally refused to face head-on. Overseas rivals from Switzerland had been creeping in for decades. When the 1920s wrapped up, Switzerland's exports to America skyrocketed from 2 million pieces annually up to 4.3 million. Meanwhile, local manufacturing dropped from 1.8 million down to 1.75 million. Consumer trends were shifting terribly, even throughout those massive profit periods, right while Elgin threw parties for hitting their 32 million mark. Cutthroat market conditions had wiped out the majority of domestic timepiece manufacturers well before the economic crash dealt the final blow. Back in the day, 35 different businesses manufactured timepieces across America. Come the early 1930s, a mere 5 were left standing. Elgin counted among that surviving handful, proving their massive operational size and corporate reputation. Still, merely staying afloat didn't mean they were thriving. Things took a significantly darker turn on February 15, 1936. An international pact between America and the Swiss became active, slashing overseas timepiece tariffs by roughly 34% compared to 1930 levels. To compensate, the Swiss dropped import taxes on the specific American exports. Politicians considered this a fair compromise for timepiece makers. In reality, it essentially funded Elgin's fiercest rival. Prior to this pact, U.S. brands controlled 53% of the local premium timepiece sector. From 1936 onward, that market dominance would continuously slip away. Federal leaders traded off crucial sector safeguards while offering zero alternatives. The only thing Elgin had absolute power over was their own merchandise. Luckily, their merchandise during that era was truly phenomenal. The interwar decades yielded several of the most stunning timepieces Elgin ever crafted. During 1928, the corporation debuted the Parisian collection for women. Featuring vibrant enamel housings with striking angular shapes, these avant-garde aesthetics completely abandoned standard domestic timepiece styles. Launching during the economic collapse absolutely wrecked revenue, yet it didn't diminish the craftsmanship one bit. Production lasted until 1933, leaving behind highly sought-after vintage treasures. By 1929, Elgin rolled out the Avigo collection under U.S. Air War guidelines. Armed forces officials spotted a serious issue. Aviators experiencing mid-flight tension kept misinterpreting their timepiece displays. The AIGO solved this beautifully. Just 4 digits sat on the face strategically placed to avoid mix-ups during quick glances. Practical issue, practical fix. Management additionally established a 3-level framework perfectly mapping out their commercial strategy across the upcoming 2 decades. A baseline Elgin featured 15 jewels, durable and budget-friendly. Their deluxe editions stepped up to 17. Meanwhile, the flagship Lord Elgin boasted 19 to 23 jewel mechanisms, exquisite craftsmanship, and luxury price tags. Running alongside them was the distinct Lady Elgin series, carrying on a tradition dating back to the 1860s. Their game plan made absolute sense. Elgin knew their buyers perfectly, constructing a merchandise hierarchy stretching from everyday accessible up to high-end luxury. Yet brilliant planning couldn't block uncontrollable external pressures. During 1951, Elgin manufactured their 50 millionth timepiece mechanism. The corporation celebrated exactly how any proud enterprise honors a genuine milestone. 50 million highly accurate clocks rolling out of one domestic facility across 87 years. Not a single employee standing on the factory floor that afternoon realized this would mark their final, genuinely joyful, baggage-free corporate victory. The Watchword, their staff newsletter printed monthly since 1921. Packed with staff anecdotes, engineering breakthroughs, and daily operations, it completely vanished in 1956. No official warning either. It just disappeared. This sudden quietness broadcasted a grim reality that quarterly earnings statements deliberately attempted to hide. By 1953, only 3 massive domestic timepiece brands remained standing: Elgin, Bova, and Hamilton. Wallam, their most historic competitor, where Elgin originally poached staff back in 1864, officially declared financial ruin during 1949. A thriving sector previously providing jobs to thousands across numerous firms had shrunk down to just a few struggling holdouts, battling for leftover consumers, while federal politicians actively gifted the remaining market share directly to overseas rivals through international pacts. Elgin kept its doors open, at least temporarily. Chapter 7, The Patriot's Trap. America joined World War II during December 1941. Barely a few months later, Elgin completely halted all consumer manufacturing across their facilities. Zero classic pocket models, absolutely no. Lord Elgin wristbands, 0 Parisian female editions, and forget about the Avigo flight gear. Absolutely nothing remained for everyday retail shoppers. The massive enterprise heavy equipment, skilled staff, and hyper-accurate mechanisms perfected through 80 years of tweaking shifted towards supplying the Defense Department. Looking at Elgin's wartime manufacturing output essentially feels like reading a comprehensive inventory of the global battlefield. Tactical wristwear designed for infantry and commanding officers across all military branches. Naval chronometers for the fleet. Hyper-accurate devices absolutely mandatory for tracking exact coordinates while sailing deep international waters. Ignition fuses for heavy artillery munitions. Microscopic metallic parts featuring timepiece-grade precision, perfectly dictating the exact split-second a warhead would explode. Flight altitude trackers and sapphire pivots installed straight into heavy cannon targeting scopes. None of this was mere side hustle manufacturing. Elgin actively forged crucial hardware embedded straight into frontline weaponry deployed across two massive global combat zones. The facility's legacy of churning out precise mechanical parts in massive quantities was fully dedicated to securing an Allied victory. American military officials officially acknowledged this effort, granting Elgin 10 distinct Army-Navy E honors. This specific title praised factories that finished their orders faster than promised, 10 times. The majority of businesses earned this prize just once, yet Elgin took it home 10 times over various agreements, goods in wartime eras. No matter how you measured it, the plant was performing better than it ever had before. Both the corporation and its employees possessed real justification to take pride in the items they created and shipped. Yet an invisible shift was occurring beyond the factory walls, a reality that politicians in Washington deliberately ignored. The Swiss stayed entirely out of both global conflicts, strictly keeping their official non-aligned status. Their manufacturing plants never stopped churning out goods for a single moment. Brands like Rolex Longines and Omega kept making civilian goods at max capacity, never forced to build arms, while freely selling to the States. At the exact same time Elgin was assembling military detonators, Swiss companies were crafting the everyday timepieces that United States buyers originally wanted from Elgin, and the federal government allowed those imports straight through. Between 1941 and 1945, upwards of 30 million Swiss gem-crafted mechanisms flooded the States. 30 million pieces, even as domestic manufacturers faced strict legal bans against making everyday items so they could back the fight. The neutral Swiss operated freely within our borders, offering goods at price points well below what stateside factories could match. Walter Tenerazzo, the man heading the American Watch Workers Union, testified before lawmakers in May 1942 to clearly state the problem. Federal authorities had barred domestic laborers from standard manufacturing for military readiness. He totally agreed with that strategy, yet pointed out that foreign rivals were simultaneously dumping endless supplies, stateside pricing, everything cheaper than what local labor required to break even. He merely requested a tax tweak rather than a total embargo, seeking a safeguard that would slow down foreign shipments while local brands were forbidden by law from fighting back on their home turf. Politicians rejected his plea, insisting that defeating the Axis took top priority. Once the conflict concluded in 1945, the devastating blow had landed, since United States troops stationed overseas had grown accustomed to Longines, Omega, and Rolex. These were reliable timepieces originating from facilities that never paused their operations. Folks started saying things operated like a Swiss watch, right around then coining a popular slang term for anything functioning flawlessly under stress. That wasn't just an innocent idiom, it was a cultural judgment cemented while Elgin was busy making cannon parts. As Elgin pivoted back to everyday consumer goods through late 1945 and 1946, they faced a landscape completely transformed behind their backs. Between 1946 and 1950, foreign shipments hovered around 7.4 million units yearly, making up about 75% of stateside purchases. Citizens endured 4 full years, deprived of locally crafted pieces, relying heavily on European imports to meet their needs. Once local merchandise finally returned to shelves, many consumers had already developed deep loyalties that proved tough to break. Labor suffered instantly, with 300 staffers losing their jobs as the plant downgraded to a 4-day schedule. For the inaugural moment in their existence, they slashed shifts out of financial desperation instead of strategic planning. Sometime during 1950, their Aurora, Illinois location shut its doors forever. Over 30,370 square feet of long-standing workspace completely went dark. It marked their earliest structural downsizing, and the most brutal paradox of Elgin's legacy unfolded right then. The organization did everything right, earning 10 military honors and supplying crucial arms elements to help crush the enemy. Their loyal staff completely abandoned their normal operations for the greater good. Yet that exact sacrifice carved out the perfect loophole for overseas rivals to seize and keep control over stateside sales. Their national pride carried a massive price tag, inextricably linking the two. Chapter 8. An unfair advantage. This is the hidden truth regarding why local clockmakers truly went under. Elgin didn't collapse from producing garbage goods, nor was its leadership clueless. By 1958, all the guys sitting on their executive panel held degrees from top-tier colleges. James Shannon, the man steering the ship between 1948 and 1960, held a Princeton diploma while doing double duty as a Northern Trust director, and eventually climbed the ranks to lead the National Association of Manufacturers. These were brilliant corporate minds steering a massive industrial powerhouse backed by 100 years of hardcore experience. The downfall of Elgin stemmed from a trio of massive overlapping economic pressures that completely overwhelmed even the smartest leadership. Separately, each hurdle was brutal. Combined, they built an inescapable trap for the business. The most tragic aspect of it all, though, the everyday employees never realized what was hitting them. Not the craftsmen fine-tuning tiny gears, nor the foreman inspecting precision limits. Their true enemy lurked miles away from the assembly line, hidden deep inside government commerce bureaus, international monetary pacts, and closed-door meetings in the nation's capital. The actual craftsmen remained completely in the dark. All they experienced was a customer base that constantly vanished, regardless of their stellar craftsmanship. Currency valuation was the initial culprit. Back in July 1944, delegates from 44 countries gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to map out the global economy following the war. The resulting agreement locked in international money values, tying every foreign bill to the American dollar at a predetermined level. Switzerland's franc was capped at 4.3 per single dollar. Unfortunately, history eventually revealed that this calculation severely underpriced their money. Financial experts from Switzerland eventually proved with hard data that their currency was heavily suppressed during those Bretton Woods years. In reality, it should have been worth vastly more than that artificial ceiling permitted. As a direct result, imports from Switzerland, like timepieces, hit stateside shelves at incredibly discounted prices they never truly earned. This wasn't due to superior European manufacturing speeds. It happened solely because global finance rules artificially kept their money cheap. It gave them a massive discount that bypassed craftsmanship, entirely relying strictly on international monetary regulations. That was the hidden killer. An Elgin employee clocking in for the day had zero visibility of these foreign exchange barriers, destroying his livelihood. Yet that barrier remained a constant presence, baking itself into the cost difference whenever a shopper debated between an Elgin and a Longines. Once the Bretton Woods system shattered during the early 1970s, the sheer magnitude became impossible to ignore. Come 1978, a single dollar yielded just 1.8 francs, a 60% plunge from previous agreements. Heading into the mid-1990s, it dropped to 1.2. From 2011 onward, Switzerland's money actually surpassed America's in value. Throughout all those earlier decades, Elgin was aggressively battling for customers. Spanning the late 1940s into the 1960s, overseas competitors enjoyed a massive cost edge tied exclusively to their undervalued currency rather than their actual products. The second major hurdle involved an industry syndicate. Switzerland's timepiece sector operated like a unified monopoly, dictating retail costs, restricting supply chains, and outright banning the shipment of specialized manufacturing tools overseas. Whenever a rival attempted to level up their precision by buying European gear, this alliance shut them down. These cutthroat tactics were so severe that the American Department of Justice actually slapped the European syndicate with a legitimate antitrust lawsuit. It was incredibly rare for federal prosecutors to target overseas monopolies, which just goes to show how devastating their actions were to stateside businesses. Unseen once again, not a single soul working on the Elgin assembly lines knew this monopoly existed. They merely sensed that their rivals possessed an unnatural, unified edge that defied basic logic. The organizational machine was very real, operating completely outside the realm of actual manufacturing. The final crushing blow came from domestic government regulations, or rather a complete lack of protective trade enforcement. While Dwight Eisenhower held the presidency, politicians genuinely rallied behind safeguarding domestic timepiece producers. The administration fully supported the antitrust litigation. This favorable climate empowered Elgin to pour money into 27 and 30-joule automatic movements. Along with the BW Raymond chronometer, massive financial commitments requiring governmental stability to make sense. That era ended when Eisenhower stepped down in January 1961. Both Kennedy and Johnson pivoted hard back toward open market ideologies, completely stripping away any specialized defenses for domestic horology. A 1936 pact that slashed import taxes by 34% remained untouched despite the drastically shifting business landscape. No federal lawmakers were intentionally handing the industry over to Europe. However, high-level legislative moves like that 1936 tax reduction and the denial of wartime safeguards, combined with an outright refusal to adapt to modern realities, snowballed over several decades into a fatal situation that no executive board could ever fix. Elgin built genuinely fantastic goods. They boasted 10 military excellence awards for their engineering executives from elite universities and an entire century of meticulous craftsmanship experience. Absolutely none of that mattered simply because this battle was never actually about who made the superior product. The fight took place on a completely rigged playing field, heavily skewed by outside elements that the actual laborers never even saw. Domestic manufacturers didn't collapse because their skills were subpar. They perished because the game had been systematically stacked against them for generations by powers way beyond their control. Chapter 9. The Brutal Descent. Heading into the mid-1950s, Elgin was taking hits from all sides with overseas rivals gaining ground, customers vanishing, and those massive economic hurdles worsening with each passing year. Then the company took a massive gamble that essentially fast-tracked their ultimate demise. Back in 1946, the firm partnered with LYIP, a French clockmaker, to create an electromechanical timepiece driven by a tiny power cell instead of a coiled spring. It was a brilliant concept since battery-driven wristwatches would ultimately rule the industry. The actual execution flopped completely. The 725 model and its follow-up, the 910, drained massive funding throughout years of creation. Technical glitches lingered despite heavy funding. Come 1962, Elgin launched a retail trial run. 6,000 pieces sold across Chicago bearing the high-end Lord Elgin label, backed by deep prestige. Over 90% came right back. These pieces simply froze from the slightest shock. A gentle knock or tiny fall, everyday wear and tear any standard wristband should easily handle. That hybrid gear system couldn't take a beating. Yet the aftermath proved far worse than the initial flop. Trying to keep promises to shop owners, Elgin swapped out those flawed 725 insides for self-winding parts brought from Switzerland. This same corporation that originally constructed a private stargazing tower just to match their timepieces with the night sky was now stuffing Swiss gears into Elgin-branded shells and pushing them on United States buyers. They never breathed a word to the press. Outwardly, the goods appeared perfectly authentic. The faces clearly displayed Elgin, though they were fakes. This habit expanded widely through the late 1950s, well into the mid-1960s. Elgin kept shipping in Swiss engines, fitting them into local housings and pushing the final merchandise as legitimate Elgin models, known by hobbyists today as Swiss Elgins. Such items lacked unique identification digits, completely opposite from truly American-crafted Elgins, which featured ordered numerals tracing back to their very first design. A trained eye could spot the difference, but average shoppers remained clueless. Meanwhile, pay attention to the corporate unraveling taking place over that exact time frame. During 1955, that tracking center at 312 Watch Street, tracing minutes via constellations since 1910, permanently shut its doors. Broadcasting innovations rendered cosmic calculations totally obsolete. The property was gifted to the U-46 school zone around 1960, transforming into a planetarium. That structure remains upright today. What was once the most accurate independent clock calibration hub ever constructed by a stateside business currently projects fake constellations above local kids. Back in 1956, the Watchword, the corporate newsletter running monthly since 1921, printed its final edition. The periodical responsible for capturing daily plant routines and sharing the firm's legacy simply vanished. Once the storytelling dies out, a major shift has already happened. By 1957, investors received their final payouts. In 1958, the Lincoln, Nebraska branch locked its doors. 440,000 square feet. 850 employees sold to the University of Nebraska. In 1960, the Elgin Watchmakers College closed after almost 40 years. That academy had successfully educated roughly 6,000 expert horologists starting back in 1921. Wrecking crews leveled the structure by 1985. On its own, every single shutdown seemed manageable. Combined throughout just 10 years, though, they painted the picture of an empire tearing away the very foundation of trust it spent 100 years building. By 1963, leftover production shifted down to a fresh facility located in Blaze, South Carolina, a tiny community that cast a 61-6 ballot to brand themselves Elgin just to lure the business in. This factory launched, bringing over 200 jobs, primarily female workers. An entire municipality rebranded for that exact reason. Yet come 1964, the flagship headquarters sitting in Elgin, Illinois, shuttered completely. The massive architecture hosting the biggest timepiece hub on Earth, the warehouse responsible for crafting 50% of every gem-studded pocket dial ever built in America, went dark forever. Summer 1966. Wrecking teams systematically tore apart the primary manufacturing warehouses piece by piece. Once finished, only the clock spire remained. 144 feet of stone and mortar standing alone on an empty dirt lot. Sunday, October 2nd, 1966, 9:30 in the morning. Explosives packed around the foundation. Locals crowded around. Bob Schroeder, a 32-year-old local cop patrolling that shift, pulled into the National Guard Armory lot to witness it. Down went the spire. Flocks of startled pigeons exploded upward into the clouds simultaneously. Taking less than 10 seconds, an entire century of iconic American manufacturing legacy slammed into the dirt. By 1967, the South Carolina warehouse closed its doors. That village, which literally called itself Elgin, was left completely robbed of the employment opportunities promised. Corporate leadership transferred directly over to a branch of Societon, a Swiss conglomerate. An enterprise that burned 100 years battling against Swiss rivals ultimately surrendered to a Swiss owner. By 1968, stateside production completely died out. The Elgin trademark got auctioned off, flipped again, and eventually bought up by MZ Bear Inc., a business currently pumping out Elgin-labeled gear over in China. These modern items share absolutely zero ties with the original craftsmanship born inside Illinois. In 1973, Elgin National Industries tried liquidating a retirement account untouched since 1918. Retired staffers banded together to fight the move. Their battle made it to Congress. The resulting victory altered national legislation, forcing corporate retirement pools to stay isolated from company bank accounts. A legal safeguard still standing strong today, directly owing to what Elgin tried pulling on the loyal folks who dedicated their entire lives to that plant. Today, that location holds affordable apartments alongside a retail plaza. Only a couple of cement pillars show the former doorway, accompanied by a small piece of metal railing. Those are the sole remnants of the biggest timepiece plant on Earth, plus one last tear-down footnote. Workers painted the instrument faces using radioactive elements so they would illuminate during the night. Contamination saturated the grounds, demanding an extensive cleanup before developers could break ground on fresh projects. They took care of the hazard ultimately. So long after shutting down this location demanded extreme caution. Chapter 10, Making Sense of Everything. 10 seconds to demolish the main spire. 60 million timepieces. 100 years of unmatched domestic engineering. They maintained an astronomy center to track celestial minutes. 4,000 peak employees. An entire town adopting the corporate moniker. Everything collapsed into debris, requiring way more time to clear away than it did to crumble. How should we interpret such a narrative? We take notes. The market pressures responsible for crushing Elgin never vanished just because domestic manufacturing finally came to a grinding halt. Those exact threats remain active today, targeting a perfectly run enterprise, totally unaware of the impending disaster headed its way. This is the real takeaway from the Elgin saga. Rule number 1 being loyal to your country costs money and capitalism will not refund you. Elgin paused consumer manufacturing to build military timers and maritime navigation gear. They earned 10 Army-Navy EIE honors for finishing tasks early. By any metric, they were the perfect American business during wartime. Buyers gave zero thought to that. While Elgin produced armaments, European watchmakers cultivated shopper loyalty. Throughout those 4 years, domestic shoppers bought imported goods since stateside options vanished entirely. People developed routines. Consumers subconsciously decided overseas craftsmanship represented the ultimate benchmark. By the time Elgin returned, the landscape had shifted completely. The takeaway: stepping away from your base, regardless of how justified, allows rivals to establish strong connections that are incredibly tough to sever. Your buyers simply pivot. That adjustment turns into the accepted baseline you must ultimately conquer. Elgin failed to do that. Point 2, excellent merchandise cannot shield you against terrible regulations. Grab an authentic Elgin timepiece from the 1890s, crank the dial. It works. Gears spinning. The mechanism counts every moment, with a precision matching today's technology, relying purely on coiled metal and cogs. Authentic mechanical brilliance produced by the millions over 100 years past. They operate flawlessly today. However, those devices were powerless to defend the corporation against international exchange rates that made rival goods wildly affordable. A foreign syndicate intentionally restricting any availability to crucial manufacturing equipment, alongside international treaties that eliminated any chance of an even playing field. Their overseas currency remained artificially depressed for more than 20 years, fully recorded. Scientifically proven through financial impacts linking directly to the massive cost penalty Elgin endured. Legislation dictates commerce just as heavily as inventory, can often even harder. Elgin crumbling had absolutely nothing to do with shoddy manufacturing. It highlights the tragic result of a competent business fighting within an economy structurally rigged against them. Rule number 3, gambling on incorrect tech at an awful moment drains your remaining reserves. That Calibra 725 endeavor drained massive funds and precious time. Seeing 90% of units sent back is not merely a setback. That constitutes complete disaster. Elgin became crippled, lacking the cash needed to pivot toward different solutions, forcing them to import European internal mechanisms just to maintain their existing catalog. Adding another layer of tragic comedy, that Elgin-Lip partnership laid the fundamental foundation for innovations that ultimately evolved into modern electric and crystal-based timepieces. Elgin scouted that frontier. Seiko dropped the premier retail crystal variant back in 1969. Elgin actually terminated their stateside manufacturing 12 months prior. They conducted those initial trials. A different player took home the trophy. Principle 4. Your corporate title loses all value once the actual merchandise stops backing it up. The Elgin logo survives today. Anyone could purchase one right now. Msberg Incorporated holds the rights. Manufactured overseas. Peddled inside massive discount department stores. This identical trademark previously graced navigation gear, precise to 30 seconds, weekly decorating marine devices meticulously crafted to meet elite military benchmarks. Identical text, zero other shared traits. Trademarks only hold the prestige that the current inventory actively builds. Once innovation dies, that signature turns into a mere sticker, ready to be slapped onto random junk. Those cheap goods never actually absorb the legacy. They just lease the font. Authentic Elgin internals sit in enthusiast display cases, ticking flawlessly 100 years later. Those Elgin-labeled items at giant retail chains simply borrow a title, nothing more. Point 5. Whenever an industrial hub folds, a town forfeits way more than paychecks. The Elgin National Watch Company meant far more than steady wages. Their whistle instructed residents on exactly when to rise, dine, and punch out. Their corporate newsletter chronicled domestic milestones across multiple generations. The horology school educated staff and their kids, alongside backing the medical center, athletic leagues, and local orchestra, forging societal bonds, reaching well beyond basic compensation. Once that foundation crumbled, the community was stripped of the very routines anchoring their everyday existence. In 2016, Elgin's mayor captain noted the bounce back dragged into the 1990s, a 25-year ordeal. Today's low-income apartments and retail blocks sitting on those grounds reveal exactly what takes over after a massive departure like that. Our final takeaway leaves us asking ourselves something. Over 100 years, Elgin manufactured 60 million timepieces and aligned their tools with celestial bodies, establishing a system so profoundly integrated into a local community that processing its downfall required generations. Their ultimate collapse had absolutely nothing to do with poor craftsmanship. Those timepieces remain functional today. Their downfall simply happened because global shifts occurred completely out of their control, shifting monetary rules, international commerce deals, new wartime opportunities, and a disastrously timed gamble on new mechanics. Individually manageable, but combining over the years, proved fatal. Anyone currently sporting a classic Elgin is genuinely carrying a piece of our nation's industrial heritage on their arm. These creations emerged from a framework so robust that they survived 50 years past the corporation's actual death. No matter your specific career path, your products or your services, who represents the Switzerland of your particular field, which competitor holds an unfair edge completely unrelated to craftsmanship, who exactly benefits from an uneven playing board, and where do you happen to stand? Elgin certainly understood timepiece manufacturing perfectly. They just completely missed the blind spots lying ahead. But honestly, neither did a single bystander standing outside watching that structure collapse one Sunday morning back in 1966.